Thank you. Happy Sabbath, everyone. Welcome to our guests. We've got a few today. Welcome. Welcome to Cincinnati. Hi to those who are on the web watching. Welcome to you too. Happy Sabbath to you. I'd like to get right into it. Let's go to 1 Samuel chapter 12. 1 Samuel 12. Starting off, 1 Samuel 12. At this point, Israel had asked for a king. God was their king, and they saw the other nations around them. They saw what it looked like to have a king, and they wanted to look like the nations around them. And they asked for a king, and Samuel gives them a little bit of a reprimand for that. Let's pick it up in verse 19. 1 Samuel 12, verse 19. All the people said to Samuel, "Pray for your servants to the Lord your God, that we may not die, for we have added to all our sins the evil of asking a king for ourselves." Then Samuel said to the people, verse 20, "Do not fear, you have done all this wickedness, yet do not turn aside from following the Lord, but serve the Lord with all your heart." Verse 21, "And do not turn aside, for then you would go after the empty things, which cannot profit or deliver, for they are nothing." Do not go after the empty things. Israel had a propensity to fall back into idol worship. They would fall back into idol worship. And Samuel was warning them, you now have a human king. God was your king. And we want to make sure, or he was giving them advice, don't fall away. Don't fall away. Because if you or the king fall away, you'll go right back to what you know, and that is idolatry. Other translations speak very directly and say, do not go after the idols as you used to. God was their king, and Samuel was now warning them that you and your human king should not fall away and make sure you stay, do not turn aside from the Lord. I'd like to focus on this section today and see what lessons we can draw out of it. Because I thought it's one of those scriptures that you're reading and you just sort of stop and you say, well, what is the impact of that in my life? Then you would go after the empty things, which cannot profit or deliver. I thought that was really interesting. The word here for empty is a word we're actually familiar with. It's tohu. I looked it up to make sure I pronounced it correctly because there was a very robotic voice that said, tohu. So that's how you say it. I was growing up, I always heard it tohu, but that's not what this robotic voice pronounced it on the web. So tohu is a word we're familiar with because Genesis 1:2 said that the earth was without form and void, and that is tohu is used in that sentence. So there are lots of words that are translated tohu, and vanity is one of them that's translated from tohu, and this empty things is as well. So Israel battled idolatry, and it is empty, or tohu as it says here. It was always a struggle for them, and they would fall back into it, and it's something I think that we can relate to. A lot of times we're trying to overcome, and sometimes we take a couple steps forward and a step back. And that's sort of what Israel would do too. They would fall back into their ways that was kind of like their default. What lesson is there for us today then? Because we don't struggle with idolatry in the same fashion that they necessarily did. So what can we learn? What can we actually fall into today that doesn't profit or deliver, as the idols couldn't profit or deliver for Israel? Idolatry can come in different forms for us today. There is actual idolatry that we see in our world today. People using symbols or icons as idols, bowing down and worshiping to these symbols, which God says not to do. But for a lot of us, idolatry doesn't necessarily have to be a physical thing. We could have things such as knowledge or understanding that we can look to as this is my ultimate focus, is to gain all the knowledge and understanding of whatever. I think with the smartphones we have, I can look up anything I want to know right now, and if I'm always making that my focus, I want to know what that means. What does that mean? What does that mean? That could be an idol. Or what about fame or riches? I think one thing that we could easily struggle with in our Western world is indulgence. Indulgence. All these things, if we set them as our priority, can become idols for us. And really, what do they profit? What do we profit by these? What can they deliver to us? Have you ever felt at the end of the week, I enjoyed my week this week, and I did lots of things, but was there anything of value that I really added to my life? We never profit anything if we put it ahead of God. It's all about where our priorities are. Fame or success and things aren't a bad thing, but they are when they are a priority. Let's go over to Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes 1. Solomon is an interesting study for us. Since he was the king and he had anything that he wanted was accessible to him. And it's interesting, it took the stature of a king to have that in his day. But for us, average, American citizens, I feel like that we're sort of in the same ability, or we're in the same place where, nothing can be withheld from me. If I want anything, it's not withheld from me. And that's where Solomon was at. So he's always a good study for us to look at. Let's go to Ecclesiastes 1, starting in verse 10. We'll see what he says here. Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my reward for all my labor. It's interesting. He almost does like a social experiment. Anything I wanted, I decided I'm just going to try it out and see what I profit. And that's what he's saying here. Verse 11, then I looked on all my works that my hands had done, and on the labor in which I toiled, and indeed all was vanity and grasping for the wind. There was no profit under the sun. The term grasping for the wind is interesting because, there's kind of a visual that you can attach to that. One of my favorite stories I like to read to the kids is Frog and Toad. And Frog and Toad are, two friends, a frog and a toad. And, one of the stories, Toad makes a list of all the things he wants to accomplish that day, but the wind blows it away. And they spend the entire story trying to catch this list. The wind has taken it away. When we're grasping for the wind, it takes up a lot of energy. It takes up a lot of our time and our energy that doesn't really produce anything. They never got their list back on Frog and Toad. The wind is ever changing, so it feels like we're always busy. We're filling our lives with all these things, and there's so much effort that we put into certain priorities in our lives. But when we turn our hands back to see what we've caught, there's nothing but, unsatisfying emptiness. Have you ever felt that way? Like, I felt like I had done so much, but really what do I have to show for it? Grasping for the wind is what Solomon said, and all is vanity. Well, where do you find real substance then? What real substance is there for us to attain? There's a couple things that I think are very important. One is righteous character. The things that we should be spending our time on, our focus, and our priority is something that it's hard to measure. Righteous character. I was reading in the Kings recently, and as it started, one of the commentators said, the Kings were interesting because a lot of times success, as we see it, is measured by wealth and power and fame, but really, success is in your character. Success is in your character, not your accomplishments or your material gains. That's something that is real. That's just something that has substance. Something else that is of substance is that with our relationships with each other. the relationships you have with each other. These are hard to measure. How do you measure how well you're doing? It doesn't seem tangible. It's I recently read it was a study, and it said that for you to find more happiness, spending your money on things is not where you find the most happiness. Now this goes against basically anything that I had ever thought. Let me give you an example. And they said that happiness you will find more often in experiences or experiences with others. So if you bought a television, no matter what, your appreciation for that television goes down. It could be the best TV in the entire world, and your appreciation for that will always go down. Now, if you decided to take that money and say, you know what, I'm not going to buy the best TV. I'm going to do something with people I know and people I care about, and we're going to have an experience together, a trip or something like that. No matter what, the study found that your appreciation for that experience will always go up, even if it was a bad experience. Have you ever had some of those experiences in your life where everything went wrong? You went on a camping trip, it rained the entire time, your tent flooded, your sandwiches got wet. But at the end of the day, when you look back, you have some stories, and you have a real relationship building, in those moments. That's something real. That's something that's not empty. Relationships have meaning. God wants us to love our neighbor. We share and we grow even in the bad experiences. There's nothing wrong, as I said, with success and things and having things, but it's the priority that we should be concerned about. Let's go to Matthew 16. Past it. Matthew 16, starting in verse 24, Jesus said to his disciples, "If anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself." That's interesting. It goes totally against our culture and what advertising tells us. Because advertising tells us, you know what, you deserve this. You absolutely deserve what we have to offer you. If you desire to come after me, deny himself, take up his cross and follow me. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Verse 26. For what profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? What profit is it if you have all these things to show for at the end of your life? What profit is it if that was the priority? What priorities do we have in our lives? Do we have prayer and Bible study as a priority? Or do we have binge watching all the seasons of House as a priority? Do we have a priority of service and reaching out to someone else? Or some other self-serving activity? What profit is that? What does it deliver? Samuel warned the people of Israel to not go back to their old ways of worshiping idols. Idols are worthless, and they leave you empty because they can't deliver. We too need to be careful of our priorities and make sure that we are prioritizing our relationship with God and in turn growing in righteous character. It's also important to develop our relationship and care for each other. There's nothing that can outweigh God's plan for this world, and he's using us today. We don't want to have a life, where we're just spinning wheels and coming up empty at the end of the day. We want a life of substance. And we can start today by putting away the priorities of riches and indulgence and personal gain and focusing on overcoming and pursuing the kingdom. those priorities will lead us to a life of purpose and meaning.